respiratory coronavirus. The disease is the same name as the lab. That's
when people say, do you think that the 2020 election was rigged? I said, every election, the American people are, the entire electoral system is built to protect Republicans and Democrats. And that is
ideology is to come to the soft habit of at least 3 generations of Americans.
Welcome back to the non-binary podcast. I'm your host, Toby Davis. We're going to start with breaking news, though. So this is weird for us. But as we started, let me put this on the screen here for everybody. So North Korea has surrounded South Korea, imposing a total blockade, cutting off food, fuel, electricity, internet, and travel. South Koreans are trapped with limited resources and no way out. They cannot get out. The world is outraged, calling it a humanitarian crisis. North Korea has not invaded, but has created this dystopian nightmare. And so what is South Korea going to do? How are they going to respond? Are they going to try to invade North Korea? Is there going to start a war in the Koreas here? And so you're probably looking this up as I'm reading it out loud, and it's on the screen and you can't find it. It's not on X or Facebook or anywhere else, right? And that's because it's not true necessarily. So there's a reason we're doing this. And so it's not true of North and South Korea. That's why you can't find it. But it is a little true, at least, of what's happening in Gaza. And so the reason for that was to kind of jolt any listeners out of preconceived notions and highlight how framing shapes perception. Okay, so that's our mission here, to find the gray areas, dismantle binary narratives like good versus evil, and explore the gray areas of complex issues here. So today we're diving into the Israel and Hamas conflict, starting with the events of October 7th, 2023, and unpacking the Gaza blockade, the rise of antisemitism, the Israeli government versus its actual people, and how media narratives shape our understanding. So I'm not an expert on this, and this is not intended to be a history lesson, but I'm going to use the media reaction, debates, facts from Israel's own websites and statements, facts from documentation, and my own critical thinking to review the material with you. So the reason this matters is because that this conflict has claimed tens of thousands of lives, displaced millions, fueled global debates, and America has played a key role to finance this war. That's where our tax dollars are going, right? It's not just a distant war. It's a mirror for how we process morality, justice, and truth. So we're not here to pick a side or simplify this into heroes versus villains. We're here to ask the hard questions and challenge assumptions. So the fake news analogy that I just did with North Korea. Okay, so I'm sorry if that was like, you're like, what the fuck here? But the whole reason was to illustrate how Gaza's situation might be perceived differently if it were another region. Okay, so if we're calling something a blockade in one context, it's a crisis. If we call it security measures in another, it's justified. Why the double standard? So let's look at what's actually happened in Gaza, and how it compares to this fictional blockade with North Korea and South Korea that I just did. We'll go back bigger to the blockade, or exactly what you want to call it, in a second. Just let me summarize it here really quick. So Israel's official stance is that it ended its occupation in Gaza in 2005 with the unilateral disengagement plan, which involved withdrawing all Israeli settlers and military forces from the territory. However, Israel has maintained significant control over Gaza's borders, airspace, maritime access, and key aspects of its economy and infrastructure. And that's where people are arguing right there. There's the gray area. So critics there argue this constitutes ongoing occupation, which, I would argue blockade more than occupation, because they're saying, if they're arguing that this is occupation, there's no Israelis in Gaza necessarily just sitting there. They're just right outside. So is that occupation or blockade? And then it is, well, whatever you call what they're doing, then the argument is there's reasons for that, which is the threat posed by Hamas. So that is a primary justification for those controls. And so the key aspects of Israel's control, they believe, are supported by official statements and their actions, both by what they've done and what Hamas can and will do, and obviously did on October 7th. Okay, so let's start there. So October 7th obviously was evil, a very evil day. That is where we could all agree. And this is where, when you see debates, this is where everybody has to start. Because if, nobody agrees with this, then they don't debate, So this is, Hamas-led militants launched a coordinated attack from Gaza into Israel, killing 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and taking 250 hostages. The attack targeted civilian areas, including a music festival, and was the deadliest in Israel's history. Hamas's stated goal was to disrupt Israel's sense of security and escalate the conflict. Okay, so let's jump to a video here, and we'll hear from, one of the experts here, Douglas Murray, on exactly what happened on October 7th.
Terribly relevant, and not merely how did the Israeli security forces miss this? How could something like this happen? What did happen? Who was responsible? So let's start by laying that out. What happened on October 7th?
What happened was that about 4,000 or more terrorists invaded Israel in the early morning. The Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other jihadist groups in Gaza started firing hundreds and hundreds of rockets at about 6:30 in the morning, almost exactly 6:30 in the morning. So air raid sirens went off across the country. But then something, and sadly that's kind of usual in Israel. It's quite common to have air raid sirens, particularly in the south, has been for 20 years. What became clear was very unusual was that across multiple parts of the Gaza-Israel border, thousands of terrorists broke in. They broke down the fences, they went to the checkpoints where Gazan workers would come through each day and where aid lorries and indeed commerce occurred. They went to those crossings as well, attacked the soldiers, overwhelmed them in quite a lot of places. It was a religious holiday. It's the holiday of Simchat Torah, and so a lot of people were at home with their families. It was 50 years to the day since the Yom Kippur War, when Israel's Arab neighbors invaded in a surprise attack as well. So you might say, well, how come it's a surprise? That was one of the things, as soon as I got to Israel straight after the 7th, one of the things I was trying to find out was what the hell went wrong. Because the Israelis have always had, certainly since 1973, a sort of invulnerability. It's not true, of course, but they were seen to be invulnerable by many of their neighbors. Certainly
Impossible to catch by surprise.
impossible to catch by surprise. It's what I call the Fowlerization of Israel, the sort of idea that it's that eyes in the sky everywhere, nothing that can be done that could surprise them. And that wasn't the case. Massive amounts of the security apparatus of Israel failed. Hamas were also very, very clever. They'd done a lot of reconnaissance, using, sadly, Gazan workers in Israel to do the reconnaissance, it has to be said, in the months and years ahead of the 7th. They knew how to take down things like communications. They knew how to take down the security apparatus at the border. And by the time that hundreds and then thousands of people were flooding into Israel, invading, they were going community by community through the south, village by village. They're called kibbutz. They're small communities of sometimes a few hundred, sometimes 1,000 people. And these were peaceful communities, farming communities. And they started to go house by house through these communities, massacring the people inside, kidnapping as well. They came across, of course, because they managed to do the invasion not just by land, but by sea and also by air in hang gliders. They managed to come into the dance party, the Nova Party, where thousands of young people were dancing in the early morning. And there's a debate about whether or not the terrorists knew that they were going to get this really easy pickings of unarmed young people dancing in the morning. But whether it was luck or design, they managed to get to the party and came in on military jeeps and trucks and motorcycles and started massacring their way through the young people in the early hours of the morning. There were a lot of questions I asked about what went wrong on the Israeli side. And there's a lot to find out about, and some of the answers I think I've come to. But although many people in their homes who I spoke to in the hospitals and in the communities in the aftermath of the 7th said the same thing to me, the thing they said was that they'd told their children as they were hiding in the bomb shelters, as their homes were on fire and they could hear people at the door trying to break in. They said that they'd told their children, don't worry, the army will be here in moments. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't. But it didn't fail entirely. There were some army in the area who put up a very good fight. And some of the army managed to get down fast. Some elite units managed to get to the south swiftly, had very, very intense firefights. But one of the other things that happened was that there were a lot of people who I describe, Arab, Druze, Jews, Israelis, who were what I call self-starters, just people who realized that everything was going wrong. The country had been invaded. It was war. And who, through some extraordinary mettle or insight or whatever, sometimes just information, somebody who happened to know somebody in one of the communities in the south who was saying, we're on fire, would just hurtle to the scene and save lives. And that's why I say that the morning of the 7th was a story of catastrophic evil from Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and indeed the Gazan civilians who came in to join in the raping and the stealing and the kidnapping. By the end of the day, 1,200 Israelis were dead, many, many more injured, and 250 taken hostage into Gaza. By proportion of population, if people were to extrapolate that out to America, it would be about 44,000 Americans killed in one day.
Well, and the hostage situation is also...
And 10,000 Americans taken hostage.
Right.
That's by proportion of population, if you extrapolate it out. It would be 10,000 Americans being...
Sorry. So I was muted. So remember that. So what are you saying there? Be like 10,000 Americans in proportion. Okay, let's remember he said that.
Dragged out of their homes and taken into enemy territory by terrorists. But the story was, first of all, of the evils that Hamas committed that day. Secondly, and the suffering that they imposed. Secondly, of course, the failure of much of the security apparatus in Israel, from which lessons will have to be learned, and not just by Israel, but by her allies. But thirdly, as I say, it's also the story of extraordinary people rising to this terrible moment and doing unbelievably heroic things. I tell a lot of the stories of people, for instance, there's somebody who's become a friend called Nimrod, who hurtled south in his car. He had been in the army, was called back to base by his commander, but by that point, Nimrod was driving south, and he managed to pick up a gun on the way, a single revolver with, I think, 8 rounds of ammunition. Went through every military checkpoint and just, he said he didn't see a live Israeli till the early afternoon. But when he did, he fought and killed many terrorists. There are other people, like there was a young man at the party I mentioned in the book, whose girlfriend I met, who had realized the situation, managed to get a car out of the party. The terrorists were massacring everyone as they came out by car. So they were shooting the cars, so then there was a log jam. But this young man managed to find a way out on another route. And he took 4 or 5 young people in the car, drove them 30 minutes, dropped them off, came back, took another car full of young people, drove again, took them back. Every time they said to him, don't go back again, it's hell, it's death. But he kept doing it. And then the last time he did it, he was killed. But there are lots of terrible stories from the day that I recount. But as I say, it also seems to me to be important to credit the people who survived and who didn't, who showed unbelievable heroism.
It didn't really.
So let's pause there. I think that's a great summary. I mean, the summary is not great, but it is a good summary of what happened. So there were definitely heroes and villains there. Obviously, that's pretty easy to say, right? That is probably pretty a binary thing to see, right? So much evil going on that day, and that it was a pretty good summary of what actually happened. Again, 1,200 civilians, 250 hostages. Can you just imagine the feeling of all of a sudden going from celebrating that morning, or just waking up that morning, and then obviously the evil begins, and you're attacked, and you're being shot at, and you're being dragged out of your homes, right? Those of us that are parents cannot imagine, that is the worst evil we could possibly even get close to imagining happening to our kids. So obviously there must be a response. So you can't come in and kill 1,200 people and take 250 people out and not have a response, which Hamas would know. And so the obvious question is, what was the mission? What was Hamas's mission? And now what is Israel's mission going forward? So Israel's response, as they launched a military campaign, two-part mission, right? Destroy Hamas and free the hostages. And this involved airstrikes, ground operations, and intensifying the blockade, the surrounding Gaza. So according to Gaza's health ministry, which many argue you can't go by, but according to that alone, by February 2025, over 48,000 Palestinians have been killed. And Israel does dispute those figures. Ceasefire attempts have failed, and as of recording this on May 17th, 2025, they're working on it even up to today, and Israel has resumed operations as of March at least. The binary narrative is, from the pro-Israeli view, Hamas is a terrorist group. Israel's response is self-defense, against an existential threat. The pro-Palestinian view, Israel's disproportionate response and blockade are genocidal, and Hamas's attack was a desperate act of resistance. So let's pull up one of the debates that I heard, one of the many debates I heard on this topic. This is kind of where I started to see people like Dave Smith debate this. Let's pull that up. And this was at the first of the debate here. So let's start this here.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here with this panel. Are we all in agreement that Israel was just to invade after October 7th? Shank, you agreed with that. Dennis, you obviously agreed with that. I agree with that. Dave, are you in agreement that that was a just...
I would say, like Cenk, it depends on what you mean by
what
invaded.
followed.
Sure.
But the
What you did
initial
with that.
invasion itself, you could see that from a just point, that that would have been justified based on October 7th, based on had they conducted themselves. There was a way that Israel could have conducted itself that you would have felt comfortable with that as a reaction to October 7th. Is that accurate?
Well, I mean, look, if you're spending your opening asking me a question, it's a fairly complex question, but I would certainly say that Israel was more than justified in pursuing and killing anybody who was involved in October 7th.
Why don't we cut the questions there? Continue with your opening statement. We'll get to
Well,
that.
I think that's very important because then we can narrow the scope of the debate. It doesn't have to be about whether the war is just, but whether Israel's behavior since invading was just and the way that it has carried it out. And I think the answer to...
So you see what she said there. So the debate can be about how they invaded and what they did, right? But then that's complicated, right? Potentially. So see her immediate answer to her own question here.
To that is very clearly yes, because
yes.
First of all, the measures that Israel has taken, obviously we look at the destruction and it is horrifying. We see these children, we see women, we see people being impacted in the most horrific way, and it looks horrible. But the reality is that war is horrible. And the thing that we have to determine is Israel engaged in a war or in war crimes? Right? Is Israel engaged in a justified response to a heinous attack, or is it going and doing things that are beyond the pale? And the evidence seems to suggest that Israel is not only behaving in a way that every other army has behaved in a very similar situation, but in a much more careful way, despite the massive destruction. And the evidence for that is in the efforts that they have made, the millions and millions of phone calls they make. You understand that Israel telegraphs to the enemy before every single thing that it does in Gaza. They're literally giving away the plan in order to get civilians out of harm's way. Now, can more be done? More can always be done. But have they gone further than any army in human history? The answer is yes. The number 33,000. Last week, Hamas put out a statement on Telegram in which they said they cannot account for 11,000 of those. So Hamas itself reduced the number to 22,000, which means that if you take the number of Hamas soldiers who have been killed, right? Israel says 13,000. Hamas itself in February admitted to 6,000. We're talking about a ratio of combatants to non-combatants that, again, simply has not been seen in urban warfare. All of these things, I think, come together.
All right, so I'm going to pause there since she just mentioned urban warfare, because this is where a lot of the arguments live, right? So how many people can you kill in urban warfare? How many people are okay to kill in urban warfare? Again, I think we could all agree, like she started, all the Hamas people, especially the ones that came into Israel, probably should die for their actions. Because if Israel responded immediately on that morning, they probably would have died, all of them. So when we're talking about this, I'm going to jump to another video, and you can see a reaction to this. This is Jocko Willink on well, this is they're showing this sound from his podcast on Breaking Points here, and show. So let me make sure it's on the screen. Yeah. So let's put this up here because we can acknowledge the how brutal Hamas's attack was and the trauma it caused Israelis, but acknowledge the scale of Palestinian suffering and the blockade's role in creating desperation.
Wanted to play some of this audio where Jocko, who served as an officer in the Battle of Ramadi in Iraq, has extensive experience with urban combat, gave some advice on how he would handle the current situation in Gaza if he was Israel. And it was so unlike anything that I've heard yet before. I wanted to play for everybody. Let's take a listen.
That immediate military action that they took was really good. It was a good, solid military action that they took quickly. At this juncture, I think it's going to be, and I think I would, like you said, I already kind of said what I'd be doing. I would probably stop bombing Gaza right now. There's people in tunnels. The enemies, you're not killing bad guys at this juncture with airstrikes. So what you're doing is just destroying the city, and you're giving Hamas opportunities to win the information operations. If I was emperor of Israel right now, we would be annihilating on the information operations. We would be doing humanitarian missions.
You showed me a video of
You've probably.
So we'll jump off of there because of the ad, but you can see what he's saying, right? So he would have stopped already. And this episode, if you look at it, this episode was a year ago at this point. Okay. So we can acknowledge, again, let me back up. This is challenging that binary idea, right? We can acknowledge the brutality of Hamas's attack and the trauma it caused on Israelis. Can't we also acknowledge the scale of Palestinian suffering and the blockade's role in creating this desperation? Okay. So let's look at some of the devastation in photos. So this is from the BBC, right? They're giving examples, showing old images versus images after, the war started here, and they're showing the destruction in Gaza. The title here is new satellite images show Gaza. Images of Gaza show the extent of the destruction caused by Israelis' intense aerial bombardment of the territory, home to 2.2 million people over the past 3 weeks. May 1st, 2023 versus October 21st, 2023. It shows you where the point is on Gaza there. And then, again, May 10th or October 10th to October 21st. Again, a little picture of a bomb going off. Al Karama from May 10th to May 10th to October 21st. And again, more pictures and photos of the destruction. And so here's a question, right? Can we condemn Hamas's terrorism, and Israel's disproportionate response simultaneously? Is it possible to mourn all civilian deaths without ranking their value? Okay, so think about that question. Why would you rank one child to another, right? Or one mother to another, or one father to another? Again, civilians. And then for a second, we could focus on the Israeli intelligence failures that were mentioned, right? That Douglas Murray mentioned in that first video in the Jordan Peterson podcast. So a 2025 Israeli military probe admitted a complete failure to prevent the attack due to underestimating Hamas and flawed intelligence. Hamas deceived Israel into thinking it was focused on governing Gaza, not attacking. So again, another non-binary question. Does this failure shift any of the responsibility? How do we weigh systematic errors against intentional violence? Okay. So now we'll jump over to the next part here. Occupation, blockade, or disengagement. So in 2005, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, under Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, Israel implemented the disengagement plan approved by the Knesset in June 2004. So this involved the evacuation of approximately 8,000 Israeli settlers from 21 settlements in Gaza, withdrawal of all Israeli military forces from inside Gaza by September 12, 2005, and demolition of most settler homes, though some structures like greenhouses were initially intended to be left for Palestinian use per international agreements. The official rationale given by Israel was that they stated that the disengagement was to reduce friction with Palestinians, improve security by removing vulnerable settlements, and shift resources to other territories like the West Bank. The government argued that withdrawing from Gaza would end its legal responsibility as an occupying power. Prime Minister Sharon said the disengagement is a unilateral act to enhance Israel's security and provide a better future for both Israelis and Palestinians. Post-disengagement control. Despite the withdrawal, Israel retained control over Gaza's airspace, territorial waters, land borders, except for the Rafah crossing with Egypt that was co-managed by Egypt, movement of goods and people through crossings like Erez and Kerem Shalom, Gaza's population registry, and telecommunication networks. Okay, so we're going to put this back up on the screen. This is from the disengagement campaign, right from Israel's website. The www.gov.il, right? So I'll put every single link I use, even the ones I didn't use on the screen here, but I'll put them all in the description. So you can see the official disengagement plan. This is from April 18th, 2004. Starts with committed to the peace process and aspires to reach an agreed resolution of the conflict on the basis of the principle of two states for two peoples, the state of Israel as the state of the Jewish people, and the Palestinian state for the Palestinian people, as part of the implementation of President Bush's vision. Right? And it goes down to the main elements, which is the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Gaza Strip is Israel will evacuate the Gaza Strip, including all existing Israeli towns and villages, and will redeploy outside the Strip. This will not include military deployment in the area of the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, as detailed below. Upon completion of this process, there shall no longer be any permanent presence of Israeli security forces or Israeli civilians in the areas of Gaza Strip territory which have been evacuated. So, officially, no Israeli security forces inside of Gaza. Okay. So they've exited, right? Again, disengagement. Security situation following this disengagement, part 3. For the Gaza Strip, Israel will guard and monitor the external land perimeter of the Gaza Strip, will continue to maintain exclusive authority in Gaza airspace, and will continue to exercise security activity in the sea off of the coast of the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip shall be demilitarized and shall be devoid of weaponry. The the presence of which does not accord with the Israeli-Palestinian agreements. Israel reserves its inherent right of self-defense, both preventative and reactive, including where necessary to use the use of force in respect of threats emanating from the Gaza Strip. Okay? So you can see right there from Israel's official website exactly where the disengagement control was. So again, is this, I would agree with you, not occupation. This is where people get, blocked in with debates and things like arguments. Like, I would agree, not occupation. But with what they just said there on their own website, is that a blockade? Is it still full control? So is it really disengagement at all? Is another question, right? And so I'm going to show sorry, let me go back to the screen here. Looking at my notes, making sure. Yeah. So the blockade of Gaza 2007 to the present got a little worse after Hamas won the 2006 Palestinian Legislative Council elections and seized full control of Gaza in 2007. Israel imposed a land, air, and sea blockade and tightened that in September 2007. Egypt also then restricted the Rafah crossing officially. So the rationale there is that Israel declared Gaza a hostile entity in 2007, citing Hamas's rocket attacks and smuggling of weapons. The blockade was intended to prevent Hamas from acquiring weapons and military supplies, pressure Hamas to cease attacks and release hostages, protect Israeli communities near Gaza from rocket fire and tunnel attacks. The official statement in 2007 by the MFA: the restrictions are a necessary response to the security threat posed by Hamas, a terrorist organization committed to Israel's destruction. Okay, so we'll jump to this other article. So this is 2011, and this is from the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories. Again, I wanted to make sure you saw, I really looked at a lot of, went down on rabbit hole on these things and showed the gray areas on this. This is some Israeli websites here. So it goes through like the control of the airspace. Israeli combat and intelligence gathering aircraft fly over the Gaza Strip. By these and other means, Israel can monitor the activity on the ground and attack targets when it wants. So again, there'll be a link to this website here. So key measures included border control. Israel controls all Gaza crossings except for Rafah, limiting imports and exports to approved goods. For example, the Karni crossing was closed 47% of the time in 2006, reducing exports to fewer than 20 trucks daily and 20 trucks daily against an agreed 400. Maritime restrictions. Israel enforces the naval blockade, limited fishing to 3 to 12 nautical miles against 20 nautical miles allowed under the 1994 Oslo Accords. The Israeli Navy has targeted fishermen with monthly incident reports. They reported monthly incidents in 2022. In 2013, Israel established a buffer zone inside Gaza that was 100 to 300 meters, with attacks reported up to 1.5 kilometers from the border. This zone covers 17% of Gaza's territory and a third of its agricultural land, risking farmers' lives. This is Israel on Google Maps. You can see the Gaza Strip down here, right? And again, if we just kind of zoom out, you can barely see the Gaza Strip. And as it was done before, we can compare to the United States, and you can see how large of an area Gaza really is, and really Israel for that matter. So military operations in security zones, 2002 to 2025. Official actions: Israel has conducted multiple military operations in Gaza to counter Hamas and other militant groups, often citing rocket fire and tunnel threats. Operation Cast Lead, 2008 to 2009, a 21-day campaign targeting Hamas infrastructure that killed 1,400 Palestinians, per Palestinian sources, and 13 Israelis. Israel claimed it aimed to stop rocket attacks. Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012, airstrikes targeting militant leaders, killing 170 Palestinians. Operation Protective Edge in 2014, a 7-week operation killing 2,200 Palestinians and 73 Israelis, aimed at destroying Hamas tunnels. And then the post-October 7th news here. Following Hamas's attack, which killed 1,200 Israelis and took 250 Israeli hostages, Israel's major offensive killed, whatever you believe, between 10 to 50,000 Palestinians by May 2025. So, again, the question here is, to summarize this, is there illegal occupation, blockade, or an illegal and evil blockade of any of this, of Gaza? Okay. So Israel's official legal stance on the, quote, occupation question, right? Israel maintains that Gaza has not been occupied since 2005, as it withdrew settlers and troops. The Israeli High Court of Justice in 2008 ruled that Israel's military rule ended, citing no permanent troop presence or administrative control inside of Gaza. Control as security measures. Israel argues its control over borders, airspace, and maritime access is lawful to protect its citizens, not occupation. The MFA in 2023 said Israel's actions are defensive. They're aimed at preventing terrorism from a hostile entity. And this is how it contrasts with international law. The UN, the ICRC, and others argue that Israel's effective control, borders, registry, and infrastructure makes it an occupying power under the Fourth Hague Convention. Israel disputes this, claiming Hamas's governance negates occupation status. So, the binary and non-binary questions, right? So, Israel claims they ended occupation. Sharon's quote was, in 2008 in the High Court, his quote said that in the High Court's 2008 ruling did that, right? But then the international law says it's effective control. Justification of that, right? They have rationale. Hamas rocket attacks, the tunnels that can come into Israel, and this is defensive, right? And so then military operations, we summarized that, or we looked at that for between 2008 and 2025, really, after October 7th, are all responses to Hamas. And they're not necessarily seizing territory, but, Netanyahu has said things like that, even in 2025. So the non-binary question here, to summarize, is, does Israel's security justify the blockade's humanitarian cost? Can we critique control measures without dismissing Israel's threat perception? Okay. So let's jump to the rise in anti-Semitism. So since October 7th, 2023, anti-Semitic incidents have surged worldwide, often tied to criticism of Israel's actions. Excuse me. So there's been vandalism in synagogues, harassment of Jewish communities, and online hate speech. And I've even seen people like Dave Smith, who is debating against Israel's response for Gaza say he's seen this like on X. Okay. So there's no specific figures or sources, but the Jerusalem Post notes that anti-Semitism is a growing concern in Jewish diaspora communities. The binary look at this is from a pro-Israel view. Criticism of Israel is often a thinly veiled excuse for anti-Semitism. Pro-Palestinian view, conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism silences legitimate criticism of Israel's policies. U.S. trends. So this is in the United States here. In the United States, mainstream outlets report record highs in 2023 and 2024. A CNN analysis of ADL audit data found that 9,354 anti-Semitic incidents in 2024, a 5% increase over 2023 and the highest on record since 1979. Fox News similarly noted that in 2024, it marked the fourth straight year of record-breaking anti-Semitism, characterizing it as part of a post-October 7th spike, and that's tied to the Israel-Hamas conflict. These incidents include thousands of acts of harassment and vandalism. In ADL's breakdown, there were 6,552 harassment cases and 2,606 vandalism incidents in 2024. Many U.S. reports emphasize the role of pro-Palestinian demonstrations in online hate. For example, CNN observed that 58% of 2024 incidents referenced Israel or Zionism, the first time a majority has done so. In practice, this has meant swastika graffiti on synagogues, bomb threats at Jewish centers, and assaults on visibly Jewish people, all documented in the ADL audit. A trend underscored by American news coverage. And I'll start putting up some websites here. So here's the Fox News website about anti-Semitism spiking around the world. ADL Task Force finds its first ever global report. And so in the one Fox News photo, it even shows a Washington, D.C. monument dotted with Hamas is coming, a stark illustration of the anti-Jewish vandalism. There you go. And I got different sources here, right? So that's Fox News. Then we go to Drop Site News. And I'm not going to subscribe. But again, it talks about, I think this is a different article, actually. Hang on. Let's jump to Daily Wire. You know Daily Wire is reporting on this. Everybody knows Daily Wire is reporting on this and what they think, right? So this article says, anti-Semitism on college campuses is not last year's problem. It is happening now. And so, again, there'll be a link to this, but you can see starts with, on October 7th, 2023, the world watched in horror as Hamas terrorists invaded Israel and slaughtered 1,200 innocent men, women, and children. Hundreds of victims, including babies as young as 9 months old, were taken hostage and subjected to abuse and torture at the hands of their captors. It should have been time for unity to stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters against terrorism and hate. Instead, a lack of leadership allowed violence and anti-Semitism demonstrations to take hold over the nation. This was most evident at colleges and universities where Jewish students were harassed and physically attacked. And there'll be a link to this article. So the non-binary look at this is we can acknowledge the real harm of anti-Semitism. You know, Jewish communities face threats unrelated to Israel's actions. But can't we also acknowledge that some criticism of Israel is policy-based, not anti-Jewish, but sloppy rhetoric can blur lines? So the question here is, how do we separate legitimate criticism of a government from hate against a people? Can we fight anti-Semitism and support Palestinian rights at the same time? And this will get us to our next part. So the government of Israel and all Jewish people. So can we distinguish between the two, the people versus the nation, the government versus the people? Okay. So Israel's government is a parliamentary democracy. The Israel political system has three branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The legislative branch is composed of the Knesset, Israel's parliament, which is 120 members. And this is easy to find, right? I'm not showing you surprising news or anything. But again, I want to make sure we understand this, right? This is, again, the non-binary look at this. So I'm going to put this on the screen here. So Israel's government is a parliamentary democracy, right? The Knesset has 120 members. Members are elected to the Israeli legislature via proportional representation. Each election cycle, the contending parties pretend a list of candidates and voters opt for a particular party. So why does that matter, right? Because that's Israel. Israel is a government, right? Just like the United States. An American is a person. The United States is the government. That is some people put together and created a government, okay? And there are lines around these nations, of course, right? Because they said this is our nation. This is what Americans said, right, in 1776. And Israel did the same in 1948, I believe it is. So that is the nation of government, or of Israel. And then how do you separate that, right, from the actions of how do you separate the actions of the people versus the actions of the government? Led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we're going to go for the government actions right here. The government has pursued a hardline stance, vowing to destroy Hamas and expand military operations. Netanyahu's policies, which are connected as security corridor across Gaza, have drawn international condemnation, with Turkey calling it a new phase in Gaza genocide policy. A UN report accused Israel of genocidal acts, which Israel rejected as anti-Semitic. Israeli public sentiment. Significant protests in Israel, like Tel Aviv in March of 2025, demand hostage releases and criticize Netanyahu's handling of the war. Some Israelis oppose the government's judicial reforms and see the war as politically motivated. A Pew Research poll shows that in April of 2025, 53% of Americans view Israel's unfavorability, and 52% have little confidence in Netanyahu. And we can put that up on the screen here. Well, this is about the war itself, right? So this is a poll from Pew Research about views of the Israel-Hamas war, right? And this says this is Israelis, not Americans. This is Israelis, and they are split in their views of the military response to Hamas in Gaza. So 39% says it's been about right. 34% say not gone far enough. But there's a whole 19% here that says they've gone too far. Israelis say the Israeli government has gone too far. Now, at least 19% in this poll. 1% refuse to answer and 7% don't know. Okay, so the binary narrative here is supporting Israel means supporting its government's right to defend itself. Whereas the pro-Palestinian view is Israel's government represents a colonial oppressor and its citizens are complicit. But right there on the screen, you can see that's not necessarily true. So many citizens want peace and disagree with Netanyahu's approach. Policies are set by leaders, not the entire population, right? As we just went through a second ago, you vote for the leaders and they create the policies. Okay? They hit the kill buttons. The leaders hit the kill buttons if they want to do it, right? Not the population of the nation. So can we criticize Israel's government without demonizing its people? Can we support Israel's safety and Palestinian liberation and hold those two ideas at the same time? Are all of Jewish people of Jewish faith and descent responsible for the decisions of the Israeli government? Well, where are all people of Jewish faith, right? Where do all those people live? Well, most live in Israel, of course. But you can see United States has 40% of all the global Jewish population, right? Another 2.8% France, 2.5% Canada. So again, it's all over the world. And that makes sense, right? So the idea is, can we look at this in the gray area and say, well, no way that all the Jewish population is doing this, right? It's the Israeli government. Okay, it's just one little government doing this. Okay, so it's not all Israelis' fault. It's not all Jewish people's fault about what's happening in Gaza. What's happening in Gaza is the responsibility of the Israeli government. Then the question is, where do you live with that? Where do do you agree or disagree on what's happening there? So clearly the media has a role in shaping this. And I even hate to say, things like fake news. But Western media often emphasizes Israelis' security needs, while outlets like Al Jazeera focus on Palestinian suffering. And I saw that as I looked everything up here. A lot of what I found was Al Jazeera focusing on Palestinian suffering. And it's not a bad focus, right? But again, at the same time, you cannot forget about Israeli suffering and the 250 hostages, right? So the non-binary question here is, how do we navigate a media landscape where every outlet has an agenda, and can we find the truth without dismissing one side's pain? So another place to look in the gray area is the idea of a 7-year war regime change. 7 years of war for regime change. And so we're going to look at this as well. Okay. So this theory posits that Netanyahu has orchestrated or leveraged conflicts across 7 fronts: Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, the West Bank, and Iran, with the goal of destabilizing or overthrowing regimes perceived as threats to Israel. This narrative is often framed as a part of a broader strategy to reshape the Middle East in Israel's favor, either for security reasons or to maintain Netanyahu's political power. The theory gained traction in opinion pieces and social media discussions, particularly following Israel's escalation of conflicts post-October 7th, 2023. The 7-year wars concept stems from Netanyahu's own rhetoric, where he has described Israel as fighting a 7-year front war against Iran and its proxies. For instance, in a June 2024 statement to U.S. military leaders, he listed the fronts as Gaza, Hamas, Lebanon, Hezbollah, Yemen, the Houthis, Syria and Iraq, the Iran-backed militias, the West Bank, the Palestinian groups, and Iran itself. This framing was reiterated in a cabinet meeting on October 7th, 2024, marking 1 year since the Hamas attack, where he called it an existential war. Critics link this to historical writings such as Netanyahu's 1986 book, Terrorism, How the West Can Win, and his 1995 book, Fighting Terrorism, which advocate for military action against terrorism regimes and regime change to achieve regional stability. So we'll take a look at this, right? Because additionally, the 1996 policy paper, which I've heard a lot about recently, which is called A Clean Break, a New Strategy for Securing the Realm, associated with Netanyahu, called for regime changes in Iraq, Syria, and Iran, and that further fueled the theory. So we'll put that up on the screen here. And this is one of those websites that has a lot of pop-ups, so I'll do the best I can to show a little bit of this here. But you can find versions of this as PDFs or websites here. And we won't read through the whole thing, but for me, I wanted to make sure that this definitely existed. And it does. I found it. You can find it too. Again, documentation. So what does news say? I don't necessarily care as long as I can find what they're saying and it's not just an opinion or a lie. Okay. So A Clean Break document does exist. Okay. And, you can see how it starts. Israel has a large problem. Labor Zionism, which for 70 years has dominated the Zionist movement, has generated, installed, and shackled economy. Efforts to salvage Israel's socialist institutions, which include pursuing supranational over national sovereignty and pursuing a peace process that embraces the slogan, New Middle East, undermine the legitimacy of the nation and lead Israel into strategic analysis in the previous government's peace process. The peace process obscured the evidence of eroding national critical mass, including a palpable sense of national exhaustion and forfeited strategic initiative. The loss of national critical mass was illustrated best by Israel's efforts to draw the United States to sell unpopular policies domestically, to agree to negotiate sovereignty over its capital, and to respond with resignation to a spate of terror so intense and tragic that it deterred Israelis from engaging in normal daily functions such as commuting to work in buses. Benjamin Netanyahu's government comes in with a new set of ideas. While there are those who will counsel continuity, Israel has the opportunity to make a clean break. It can forge a peace process and strategy based on entirely new intellectual foundation, one that restores strategic initiative and provides the nation the room to engage every possible energy on rebuilding Zionism, the starting point of which must be economic reform. To secure the nation's streets and borders in the immediate future, Israel can, and it goes through. And this is a long document here. And some of it gets locked on this website here. Okay. So look through that. And then we'll go through the wars themselves. So to understand the theory, let's break down the 7 fronts and Israel's involvement based on available sources. So the Gaza-Hamas conflict. So this is the military campaign of post-October 7th, 2023. Israel's actions, airstrikes, ground operations, blockade intensification, territorial control, all as of May 2025. Their official rationale: destroy Hamas, prevent future attacks. Okay. Separately, we could probably agree on this official rationale that's coming in, right? So Lebanon, which is Hezbollah, The key conflict, clashes following Hezbollah's solidarity attacks. Israel's actions. Invasion in October 2024. Assassination of Nassan Hezbollah in September 2024. Official rationale. Degrade Hezbollah's military capabilities. So defensive. Front, Syria. Key conflict. Strikes against Iran-backed militias post-Assad invasion. So Israeli actions. Airstrikes, invasion after Assad's fall in December 2024. Official rationale. Secure the borders, prevent militant takeover. The front, Yemen. Key conflict. Houthi attacks on Red Sea ships in Israel. Israeli actions. Retaliatory strikes, coordination with U.S. and allies. Official rationale. Counter Iran-backed threats to shipping. Okay, Iraq. Attacks by Shia militias on Israeli interests. Israeli actions. Airstrikes on militia targets. Official rationale. Defend against Iran-backed attacks. And obviously, we invaded Iraq as well after 9/11 and Afghanistan, right? So we invaded and took out Iraq. So there's several pieces of evidence that cite the regime change narrative. One big one that I keep hearing that I had to find, which again also exists, is in 2002, a congressional hearing where Netanyahu supported the U.S. invasion of Iraq. So we have that here.
Obviously, we like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how to achieve it. If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. The more victories you amass, the easier the next victory becomes. The first victory in Afghanistan makes the second victory in Iraq that much easier. The second victory in Iraq will make the third victory that much easier too, but it may change the nature of achieving that victory. It may be possible to have implosions taking place. I don't guarantee it, Mr. Turney, but I think it makes it more likely, and therefore I think the choice of Iraq is a good choice. It's the right choice.
So you can see in his own words there, it's
We've found the vibe board extremely useful for.
It sounds almost like a game. You know, the first win gets you another win, and that win gets you this win. It's easier to win. These are just wins and losses in that statement there. Just kind of weird if you think about it, because that's killing people. So regional escalation says that Israel's actions, such as the fall of Assad in Syria and strikes on Hezbollah's leadership, are seen as contributing to regime instability. For example, a Common Dreams article argues that U.S. and Israeli interference wrecked Syria, aligning with regime change efforts. Then there's political gains too, right? Polls show that Netanyahu's popularity rebounded post-escalations, suggesting he may use conflicts to maintain power. A New Yorker article notes his approval ratings rose to pre-October 7 levels by January 2025, correlating with regional actions. The official Israeli narrative. Israel's official stance, is articulated by Netanyahu and the IDF, frames these conflicts as defensive. Right? In a July 2024 statement to Jinsa, Netanyahu emphasized, Iran is fighting us on a 7-front war. We have to deal with the Axis. The Axis doesn't threaten only us, it threatens you, highlighting a defensive posture against Iran's proxies. The IDF and the MFA stress that goals like destroying Hamas and deterring Hezbollah are security measures, not regime change, as seen in briefings in Gaza operations. The counterarguments and the controversies that surround this. Critics of this theory argue that there's a lack of direct evidence. No official document outlines a 7 wars for regime change plan. The theory relies on interpreting actions rather than explicit policy. That's from the Washington Post. It's a reactive nature. Conflicts are often responses to attacks, such as Hamas's October 7th attack or Hezbollah's solidarity attacks, suggesting reactivity rather than a master plan. Domestic constraints. Netanyahu faces significant opposition, with 70% of Israelis wanting him to resign post-October 2023, limiting his ability to pursue a grand strategy. So the controversy lies in interpreting intent. Is Israel defending itself, or are its actions part of a broader regime change agenda? A Middle East Monitor article critiques the 7 fronts narrative as exaggerated to justify military actions, while official sources deny genocidal intent, facing ICC warrants for crimes against humanity. So the non-binary analysis of the 7-year war regime change idea. The evidence leans toward Netanyahu using these conflicts opportunistically, at least, for security and political gain, rather than a deliberate regime change strategy. But again, it's all gray area here. The cumulative effect of Israel's actions, such as territorial control in Gaza and strikes on Syrian opposition, could destabilize governments aligning with the critics' views. So you can, again, look at the results against the idea, and it's pretty easy to say, yeah, it kind of happened. I mean, it happened. So this duality suggests a complex interplay. Defensive measures with potential regime change outcomes, maybe not a single unified plan. And why would documents exist? Like, why would they literally write that down? So the idea there was to highlight this rhetoric in the official justifications and present critical views, and then pose non-binary questions. So was there a 7-year regime change strategy? If there was, it worked, and now the U.S. is potentially really close to war with Iran, because it hasn't worked 100%. Iran would be the 7th to drop. And you can look up, this just came out in the last couple months, where Israel created a plan to take out Iraq, invade, and said that it would have to involve the U.S. Okay, again, so that's potential strategy there. But if you agree that it's a strategy, you might also agree that it's needed, that again, it's a defensive position, because again, if we pull up the screen here, there's again a couple things to look at here. Yes, Gaza is very small, but Israel is also very small and potentially surrounded, but by what they call evil. And so if you are looking at this and you believe that you are good and everything, you're trying to protect your nation, and you're surrounded by evil that's trying to kill you constantly, then you might just agree and admit that, yes, this was a strategy, and that was the whole reason for it. It's all defensive. Okay? So there's some very unbinary looks at that. So let's kind of jump to our conclusion here. So the October 7th conflict predates 2023, obviously. Stems from the 1948 establishment of Israel, the 1967-68 war, and decades of occupation. Hamas's role: they're a militant group with a history of violence, but also a governing body providing social services in Gaza. The U.S. supports Israel. So on the international involvement front, the U.S. supports Israel. I mean, that's supports may not be the best word there, but they do. While Iran backs Hamas and the Houthis, which complicates all the peace efforts, right? Protests in Gaza have happened. They're rare, but anti-Hamas protests in 2025 show Palestinian frustration with both Hamas and Israel. So how do we weigh historical grievances, current violence, and future peace at the same time? Is there a path forward that does not repeat the cycle? So I'm going to put up one more video in recap.
Debate.
I know.
And so there's a ton of this. You have Nikki Haley going over and signing bombs.
It's hard to overstate how much I hate that, by the way.
Yeah. Well, right. And I mean,
there are a lot of unreasonable Palestinians, of course. There are also some wonderful, a lot of Christian Palestinians, a lot of wonderful Muslim Palestinians. So I hate that. I just
it's terrible. Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible on.
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling a little silly goosey. No lie, this working.
Sorry about that. We'll try to take that out.
On any side, you don't
We all live
dehumanize people like that.
I agree.
Yeah. And so, what's his name? I'm blanking. What's the congressman in Florida? Randy Fine? Is Fine his last name?
Guy?
I don't know, but did you see the stuff he's posted?
Seems like a nut
Oh
job.
my God. It's just, so again, okay, you want
Wait,
to talk
he's
about.
the one who's like, we want to kill all their children or something?
Well, someone basically I think someone tweeted like a picture of a dead Palestinian baby, and he said like, good, we need more or something like that. It was something really close to that. I don't want to get this wrong.
Who could vote for someone like that?
Well, Trump endorsed him after that.
After he said it was good that a baby was dead?
I mean, again,
I would love to have him on and just
pull up
ask
the
him about
actual
that.
tweet on that
Yeah.
because I don't want to misremember it, but it was something really egregious. And he's, there's a lot of this stuff. It's how you get Nikki Haley signing bombs that are about to go get dropped on women and children. You're like, I'm sorry, that's fucking sickening. Like, what the hell is that? Like, what are we, a part of some death cult or something? I mean, this is like real. And so, of course, then, Douglas Murray's book is like Democracies and Death Cults or whatever. And which is kind of funny in a way to be pro-democracies while you're also making the argument for expertise. Because you would think if you're for democracy, the whole point of experts is to explain it to regular people who will ultimately have the authority of deciding which experts are in charge and which experts are not in charge. There's a little contradiction there. But again, this is my issue. And this is where I think, Tucker, in some way, we're really like kindred spirits.
Love what a higher IQ you have than Douglas Murray. It just cracks me up.
Well, he's got a very high verbal IQ. He's more talented in a lot of ways than me.
Yeah.
I'm telling the truth.
No, but I mean that's such a deep contradiction that I doubt he's aware of.
Probably not. But I will say this, and this is where I think in some ways, this is why me and you always get along. I think we're kindred spirits in this way in some sense.
For sure.
But I really do, I mean this. I mean this so sincerely. In my soul, in my heart of hearts, I'm a crotchety old right-winger.
Yeah.
Like that's who I want to be. Okay. That's who I try my best. Yeah. I want to be, I'm not just like a Western chauvinist or whatever. Like I think Western society is better than everything else. I think I'm a libertarian, and I think it's one of the goofiest things about libertarians in general that they kind of try to run away from that and be egalitarian to some degree. That's ridiculous. What are you talking about? You believe in individual liberty? Well, then you don't get to say every civilization is equal because only one of them respects individual liberty, and that's the better one. Okay, that's
by your own definition.
That's right.
Right.
So screw all this other. Egalitarianism is a revolt against nature, as the great Murray Rothbard wrote. I'm against all of that. I don't believe in relativism. I don't don't believe in all cultures are equal. I would like to sit here and look down on the Muslim world. That's what I would like to do, because my society is so much better. And if anything, I'd be lecturing you guys got to do liberty better. You guys don't really even understand how a free society works. I'd like to be there.
Me too.
That's actually what
I once was.
That's what confirms my bias, is like stuff like that. The problem is I just know too much about our government and what our government's done to these people. And not just what we've done to them, but that we've been propping up the Islamists for 40 years.
Literally.
And so what are we talking about here? You can't then turn around and go, look at them, they're a bunch of Islamists. No, I know what you did. You propped up the Islamists so you didn't have to deal with the commies. Like, regardless of any of that, I insist on one standard for everything. If you're going to say Hamas is a death cult, what the hell is the U.S. government? What is the Israeli government? You get to sit here as my government has, in the last 25 years, destroyed Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Somalia, Yemen, Ukraine, and now Gaza. That's what my government's done. I don't get to call someone else a death cult. I'd like to just look down at them as a death cult, but sorry, we're the biggest purveyors of violence in the world, not Vladimir Putin. And like, again, it's just, if you look at these things, you just have to have one standard and apply them across.
That's about me, but I love organization.
All right, we'll stop there because I can't take all the ads. But to summarize this, we'll stop here. The Gaza blockade mirrors a dystopian crisis. October 7th exposed deep wounds. Anti-Semitism and anti-Palestinian sentiment are rising, and the Israeli government doesn't represent all Israelis. This isn't about choosing Team Israel or Team Palestine. It's about seeing the humanity on both sides, and that's what Dave Smith was trying to summarize there. If you kind of say if you unhumanize somebody, then you can just kill them immediately, right? Because there you can just say, all right, that's the evil person. I know who to kill. I know where my target is. But it's about seeing the humanity on both sides and questioning the systems, the governments, media, militias, all together that perpetuate suffering. So next time you see a headline about this conflict, ask yourself this. What's being left out? Who's framing this? And why? So, thank you. I would ask you to put in the comments, what binary narratives have you noticed in this conflict? Share your thoughts in the comments. You can email us. You can find the email on the YouTube on YouTube here. So, appreciate you guys watching, and on the next episode, we will tackle another binary topic, good versus evil, black and white. So we appreciate it. Stay tuned. Thanks to all the podcasts I use and all the articles. They'll all be in the descriptions below. Until then, have a great night.